Well, I took over at quite a developmental stage when the challenge was to move beyond the small group of people who were involved in community mediation and particularly family mediation. And we were such a small country and we all knew each other, sort of. Then the challenge was, can't we create an inclusive institute for all the sectors? So I suppose I became a sort of bridge builder to the workplace people and the commercial, and we began to grow sectors. The next big thing was, in order to make that inclusive, how do we bring everyone together? I started the first annual conference of the Institute. It was in November 1999. Okay. And we held it in Belinter House, which was at that stage still as kind of a centre which the nuns ran, the Sisters of Zion. And the Friday night in the kind of the basement or kitchen area, we started a sing-song. And it was Irish style, you know, and it was just a great event, lovely moments, which really had a bonding effect for everyone. The third big development was around accreditation. So we worked on what emerged as the Blue Document. And the Blue Document set out a blueprint. We printed in blue because it was sort of a blueprint, which set out the structure of the training. So I suppose the other big development was growing those sectors, and so we deliberately created the executive, we restructured the executive committee in the Constitution. I think the Constitution came in around 1998 or something, whichever version of it was at that stage. And we made sure that each sector would vote on 2 reps onto the executive, who would join with like 4 elected people from the AGM, because we believed it should grow from the bottom up. I suppose the other big event was way back in 1993 when we ran the first international mediation conference. It was in Killiney in the Fitzpatrick Hotel, and the President, Mary Robinson, opened that for us with a very good speech, lovely and warm and welcoming, but also she really understood what mediation was about and could see how it could play. So I suppose that for all of us was a sense we've arrived. We hadn't yet really, but it was a sense that everybody loves to be acknowledged, and she was able to do that in a lovely way. Still need to see structural mechanisms to ensure that people hear about mediation before they go, or if they go to the solicitor, that they are encouraged to consider mediation. It's great that 25 years on that we're able to remember our beginnings and those little meetings we held in, I'm trying to remember where it was, I think it was in Trinity, there's only about 5 or 6 of us, and out of those little grains of mustard seed has grown the institute that we have.
The main vision that we had was to be the professional home for mediators. That again was to build that public credibility in the organisation. We were quite unique, and for this again I go back to the people who founded the organisation and who delivered it through until my time. And that was that we had one organisation for all mediators, no matter what colour of creed, no matter what you did. And that is, I think, unique, and certainly in my time was unique, because most other places the commercials are on the one side and family separating couples and maybe workplace are on the motto, if you will, was there's nothing that you can't learn from another mediator. Every mediator has something to contribute, and even though you don't practice their specialty, and you see this at Sharing and Learning, we can all learn from mediators in every other sphere. of practice. The whole thrust of this accreditation was to have an internationally recognised standard, which we ended up with. I think it was 60 hours training. So we had to produce what were the rules and processes of the assessment procedure. And that again was another long debate and discussion as to what was the best way to do that, and we ended up with the videoed role play, the 1 hour videoed role play, and I think that still persists. So we then devised CPD, Continuing Professional Development Rules. So what requirements would be put in? Would they be annual? Would they be biannual? And again, we looked around the world for that. The Accreditation Committee did a lot of work on what would be appropriate. We also introduced the fact that you had to be insured. You were not allowed to practice without insurance. Because again, we were trying to build up public credibility in the organisation, and that members of the public or parties or people who would send parties would know that if they used an MII mediator, that there were appropriate and proper standards of qualification, continuing professional development, and that the mediator would be insured. But we reviewed completely the ethics code, and in fact it's a code of ethics and practice. The ethics, obviously, because what is an ethical practice, and the MII had to have an agreed standard of ethics. But also because as a mediator you are most times a sole practitioner, we felt it was also useful to give guidance on the practice. So not necessarily so much ethics, but practice as well. So the ethics is really important because where you have people providing a service to others, there is always the possibility or likelihood of a complaint. And so the MII had to protect both its own members and the people with whom the members were dealing. And so we devised then a complaints procedure so that if somebody had a complaint, you check, was it an appropriate complaint, did it fit within the role and remit of the mediator, and then you needed to be fair both to the mediator and to the complainant, so that people would have confidence and faith in the organisation that it would produce mediators of a good standard, and that if they weren't of a good standard, that proper appropriate action would be taken. So we established the registers, which still goes today. People can find a mediator, and we put people's profiles there, again to provide a level playing pitch. So people could come from the outside and see who they wanted, and they could select themselves. But this took hours of work on everybody's part, and I would like, as I sit here now looking back on it, to thank everybody who was involved in all of those discussions, whether they agreed or didn't agree with what was being proposed. Everybody took the time and the trouble and the energy to give their views, and that, I think, is why most of what I've talked about here remains to this day, because it was teased out in minute detail. The front line of all of this were the 3 administrators with whom I have dealt over the time, and they're the front line, they're the people who answer the phone, and they really are, if I say, the nuts and bolts of the organisation. Presidents and committee and council members come and go, but these 3 people between them over the last any number of years have managed and guided the organisation and held it together. So they are Wendy Porter, unfortunately now deceased, Deirdre Conway, and our present administrator Alison Martin. And all members, I believe, owe a real debt to them, because as I said, they keep the show on the road. I think it has to be that symposium. We ran a one-day conference, or symposium we called it, I'm not quite sure why, called Mediation Works. I have to say it was a terrific day, but what was most important was it showed the credibility that the MII had, that these people were willing to come along, including the President, and to be associated with it and to promote mediation. So that was terrific, and I thought really put the MII absolutely on that map. It's actually the same vision. It's that the MII is the professional home of mediators, and there are, mediators may be other things, so they may be solicitor barristers or arbitrators or social workers or therapists or whatever they may be. But it is really important that for their mediation activities that they are lined up with the MII, and it's really important that, especially under the new bill which may today be an act, that the Mediators Institute takes front and centre.
I suppose one of the exciting things that happened during my time was the Family Mediation Service were in kind of negotiations with UCD to set up a Masters in Mediation and Conflict Resolution. That was actually the brainchild of Professor Gabriel Kiley and Mary Lloyd and myself, and Gabriel and Delma Sweeney would have been sitting down around the table working out how students of UCD could work in FMS and how FMS people could be part of the Masters. And we did finally work it out, and that Masters ran for 2 or 3 years. And then Gabriel actually retired. In the meantime, he and I got married, which is quite nothing to do with the Masters. I did actually start the Masters myself and only completed it last year in Maynooth, and because the Masters programme eventually sort of folded in UCD and then re-emerged in Maynooth relatively recently. So I was allowed to, or managed to finish it anyway, finally, which was great. So that was very exciting, certainly for the mediation service, to have a link with a third level institution. And I think it was very good for mediation generally to have that. So you know, I suppose that was the main thing that happened during the time I was president. I suppose that for me it was very exciting and a privilege to meet the international stars of mediation as they were then, if you like. I mean, Red Ken Cloak and Larry Fong, but actually didn't expect to be sort of the one in charge of them at the conferences. So that was a great honour, really, and very enjoyable. I think there's one thing that we still haven't fully achieved, and that came about when we were having a discussion which Maynooth facilitated about trying to get all the different sectors and all the different organisations associated with mediation together around the mediation bill and the possibility of setting up a mediation council. We had one meeting, and we never actually, then all the different sort of strands, we made resolutions that we'd all work together. And I just think that is absolutely key to the future of mediation, that we have somehow set up a multi-sector council, which has, so we can draw up regulations, they can be approved by the Department of Justice and respected, and you know, we can then, we will have a regulatory body, because I think that's what we're lacking, and that's what I think people, you know, the government is looking for, and particularly with the mediation bill coming, I think that ought to be our main aim.
Okay. I also would have experienced growth in the Institute as well. I was pleased to say that under my presidency the membership grew, I think, in excess of 800, which was, I suppose, a recognition, one, for what the MII had done and the standards that we had put in place, but I think also for the growing interest in mediation within Ireland as a real opportunity, an appropriate process to use across a range of disputes. I was also pleased as President to oversee the, I suppose, grounding of the standards, and for both mediators in relation to assessment to practitioner standard, and also for our trainers. We've certainly seen a growth of trainers in Ireland throughout the years. I don't think Ireland is alone in that. There's often criticism that there's more trainers than there are mediators, but we recognise that if there was to be training standards for mediation, and certainly believe that there should be, that we should have standards for the trainers. And I was very pleased to have overseen development and the ongoing work of Mary Rafferty in that area. It's not finished yet, but we're now pleased to see, I suppose, close to 24, 25 different training bodies and training organisations accredited by the MII, and I think most people who complete mediation training in Ireland will have undergone an MII accredited programme. I suppose a very significant development took place that, following from great work from Deirdre, who would have been our first paid member of staff in the MII. Alison joined as our office's manager, and I think we all know Alison quite well now, and the tremendous input Alison has given to our institute, and I've no doubt that we wouldn't be as strong as we are today if it wasn't for Alison's input and dedication and tremendous energy. I was also involved working with Peter Cassels and the Kennedy Institute in Maynooth University for developing the first national code of ethics for mediators, we felt was very important in relation to helping the bill, which hopefully will be legislated in the coming months, that there was a national and agreed standard, and we based that on not only our own standards but also on standards of practice which have been recognised in Europe with the European Code of Practice for Cross-Border Mediation. So I was very pleased to have all bodies that were interested in mediation in Ireland participate in that process, and where we now have a national standard of practice or code which is signed off yet again, as I said, under great stewardship from Peter Cassells and the Institute in Maynooth. Significantly as well, we had on Tuachtaran President Higgins open our conference in 2013, I think, and it was a tremendous honour for the Institute that President Higgins opened the conference and gave a very strong endorsement for mediation as a process. I think we all took great energy from that, and it really gave us confidence that the work that had been laid down over the years was well invested, and it certainly gave us confidence to move into where we currently are. Also, I was very pleased to be involved with developments from the court services in relation to mediation, some pilot programs which had taken place before my time but which continued under the stewardship of Tom Ward, and certainly gave very strong messages to us that even in very difficult conflicts, mediation certainly provides a very valuable and cost-saving process to the state and to the disputants. So I was honoured to work with Tom Ward and with the court services in a lot of initiatives which Tom was working on, and the MII was happy to support. I was also involved with the Chambers Ireland in relation to a pilot process for commercial or business related mediation, and I understand that process was also endorsed by the court services, and it was rolled out in my last year as president. Yet again indicated to us the growth that mediation was now seeing, and that business leaders were prepared to engage in it, and I suppose approach the MII for guidance and support in relation to those developments. I was also very honoured in 2014 to be invited to a global conference on mediation in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. So I was there before the Olympics arrived, and I saw, I suppose, a country growing to meet that challenge. But it was delighted to be at a week-long conference and to present a paper on, I suppose, the developments and learnings in Ireland in relation to mediation, and both where it resides in our own legislative procedures and also how it's grown in Ireland. I think working with the council was an absolute pleasure. I was very lucky to have around me people who are committed, who are giving of their time. I think is one thing we mustn't forget, that everybody who sits on council and feeds into all the work of the MII are volunteers and give of their time freely. So I was honoured to work with such a motivated and great group to work with, and every decision we made was made in true mediation terms by consensus, and it was a pleasure to work with that. So their memories I'll bring with me forever, to be honest. Looking at where we've come from, it's tremendous to see mediation being used as a process far more regularly than when I would have trained as a mediator and joined the MII back in the early noughties. I suppose what made me join the MII was the fact that there was a professional body for mediators, which I think is very important, and I would like to see the MII stay very much focused on that core element of what it's there to do, to maintain the standards that we all need to be reminded of and guided as mediators, and to grow the perception of mediation as a very real an appropriate dispute resolution process, not an alternative, but something that is very much part of everybody's journey, and hopefully the only process they have to engage in their journey through their dispute resolution. So I would like to see the MII guiding everybody who's engaged in mediation, both as mediators and as disputants, to consider mediation in the first instance. I would also like to see the MII in the future being very much seen as centre to the standards that it's set, which under my time as president I certainly got a very strong sense that people regarded what we were doing both nationally and internationally. So it's very important, I think the MII would continue with that as a core focus and be seen as such into the future.